But as Herbert says, she was suspended like Muhammad's coffin, between heaven and earth. She was too young for that close triumvirate which had consisted of Mother, Mrs. Lancaster and Hester Talbot, and her marriage had placed an unbridgeable gulf between the local spinsters and herself. Dr. Armstrong, calling that morning to look me over, had expressed some anxiety about her. "It's the wrong time of life for her to go through all this," he said. "Head looks all right to me, Lou, you can go down to dinner if you feel up to it." "But I'd be glad if you could talk to her a little. She's got something on her mind. She's still pretty much in love with Brian, you know, and I imagine she's got some sort of bee in her bonnet about him." He went into the bathroom, washed his hands carefully and came back still holding the towel. "I suppose people make their own hell in this world," he went on. "They're fond of each other, you know, probably a good bit more than that. But they're both stubborn. It's 20 years since she locked her door against him for some peccadillo or other, and I haven't a doubt myself that there have been a good many times since when she's unlocked it, and others when he had brought himself to try it, and had to go away. Pitiful, isn't it, with life so short?" All that was in my mind that afternoon when Laura Dalton walked into my room and locked the door behind her. I can see her now, in her pale lavender summer silk, her too youthful hat sitting high on her head, and under it a pair of devastated eyes and a mouth that twitched with nerves. She did not even explain that locking of the door. She moved directly across the room and stood over me, and for a moment I was startled. She did not look quite sane. She wasted no time in preliminaries. "Is it true," she demanded, "that they have arrested George Talbot?" "I don't know about an arrest. They have taken him to headquarters." "The fools! The fools!" she broke out. "Listen, Louisa, George never killed Emily Lancaster, or her mother either." "I know that. But I can't tell the police." I can't. I can't." It was some time before I could quiet her, and at first I did not realize what she was trying to tell me. It was only after a full half hour, while I listened to the bottled-up miseries of a jealous and suspicious woman, still passionately in love with her husband and now terrified beyond all control, that I knew that Mrs. Dalton believed that her husband, with the assistance of Margaret Lancaster, had killed both Margaret's mother and her sister. Stripped of inessentials, her narrative ran something like this. Years ago, Margaret Lancaster had been engaged to Brian Dalton. He did not live on the Crescent then, but he used to come in his high trap and take Margaret for drives. Mrs. Lancaster had opposed the match, however. She didn't like Brian, was what she said. And when Margaret insisted on marrying him anyhow, she simply went to bed for 6 months. I was very young then, she added quickly, but my father had built here where we are now, and I can remember my own mother saying that Mrs. Lancaster had gone to bed because it was the one way she could keep Margaret at home. Then one day Brian asked her to drive with him, and after that they became engaged and were married. And I had the house by that time, she said, so he came to live on the Crescent, although it wasn't the Crescent then. It was just country, and he never really liked it. It was to that, his boredom and his revolt against the Crescent, that she laid his unfaithfulness. There had been somebody else, as she put it, every now and then since. And for the past few months it had been Margaret Lancaster again. She was, I thought, trying to explain something to herself rather than to me, for all this came out only by degrees. She would stop, stretch the fingers of the gloves on her lap and start again, as though by going over the whole business and trying to coordinate it for me, she was trying to follow the steps by which she had come to her tragic conviction. I thought it was all over, she said. I still can't see, I think she led him on, Louisa, for her own purposes. He hadn't been faithful. We separated years ago over a maid in my own house. But after all, a man of 50, well, I thought all that was over. I suppose, she added doubtfully, that I shouldn't be telling you all this, Louisa. You're still a young woman. I'm 28, I said briefly. I don't think you're telling me much I don't know. I can't believe what you are telling me about Margaret Lancaster. That's all. I was, however, uneasily remembering that anonymous letter sent to the police, and I felt that my voice lacked conviction. If it did, she did not notice. It's true, she asserted. I don't know how far it's gone, but she's smart and not bad looking. And after all, the time comes when any man has to learn that young women aren't interested in him. There was apparently no mistake about the situation. He had even taken Margaret out driving, meeting her someplace downtown. That was early in August, And once she had found Margaret's bag in the car. It had slipped down beside a seat cushion, and she had given it to her husband without speaking. He had simply shrugged his shoulders and taken it. But she had no other proof.